Now, Jason, you had worked inside of Sony for many years. You know, one of the frustrations some of the first-party teams have always is that, hey, we're just addressing one audience, and we're not speaking to a wider audience. So Naughty Dog makes incredible games, but there are a lot of gamers that don't get to experience those games because they don't own a PlayStation. In this next generation, the idea of exclusive games for systems, are we going to see a lot of that from the publisher side, I guess, but also on the developer side? I mean, would there ever be a scenario where we talk about mobile and tablet? I mean, should Sony be putting, Tearaway that just came out for the Vita, should that eventually go on to, iPad or something like that? Or should
Absolutely
old library content come out? I mean,
it will. You will still, of course, you will still see first-party titles.
Right.
I mentally, I always used to complain that when Crash came out, we sold 9 million copies of a few of them, and that was on one platform.
Right.
So had we also been on our competitor, which at the time was Genesis, not Genesis, I'm sorry, but the Sega systems,
right.
Saturn, we would have sold more units, so we would have done better. 9 million, it turns out, is more than Capcom has sold of any game they've ever put out. They just put out a press release that said their highest selling game was 5.6 million.
Right.
It turns out you can do really well making games for just one platform, and Naughty Dog continues to do that.
Yeah.
So Sony will continue to fund them. They've been incredibly good at funding them. Microsoft as well has funded internal. Those will stay around and they will do just fine.
Now they've been successful with a game with a main character that doesn't look just like you. Nathan.
He looks just like Crash Bandicoot?
Right.
Naughty Dog's in a great position. Making first-party titles. They're perfectly happy doing what they're doing. They're reaching a very large audience. The games are profitable. There's absolutely no reason for that to change.
But for the first time, it feels like now with these new systems and the architecture of PlayStation 4 and Xbox One, they're similar enough. I think a lot of developers will be able to more easily program things across those devices.
This is all asymptotic to the PC model,
right.
And they're kind of like the same device inside. The major difference between them is the way the operating system lets you use or not use stuff, and that'll change over time. The traditional kind of stuff that barred developers from using them, or differentiated the way they looked, is becoming less and less and less important with time.
So does the content then become more ubiquitous that you're going to see stuff on PC, console,
I think
maybe even tablet?
Outside of the first parties, why would you make something for only one console?
See, and
it doesn't make sense unless you're getting paid.
Especially
by one of the
if you're taking a big financial bet on a big expensive game.
Since we're not talking about Nintendo, I want to bring them up. So I think the way Nintendo can get its mojo back is to release the entire Game Boy library, maybe even Game Boy Advance library, on cell phones and on tablets. And sell, and I know the control scheme's not the same, but it's something that could be done.
The controller is coming to tablet.
So if you sell Super Mario Brothers 3, the original Game Boy Advance game, for $4.99, on tablet, you're going to convert a giant number of these 2.5 billion people who are going to be on the internet. When your next console comes out, you can say, hey, you want to play Super Mario Brothers 4 or 5 or 6? I think that's a smart way to hook people.
I think you're even thinking about Nintendo in too small a context. Nintendo is Disney, and Nintendo just needs to figure out that they're Disney. And it's frustrating to watch them continuously not figure out that they're Disney. Like those characters and those games are so ubiquitous in world culture that you can't even really see how ubiquitous they are. They're so woven into everything. Okay, and continuing to focus on putting out consoles and doing the kinds of stuff they're doing, I think is belying the incalculable value and reach of all of that content. And that content should be everywhere. I think that the Sega lesson in Japan has such a horrible dark cloud over the idea of exiting that hardware business and going into a pure content business, maybe, and other economic factors that it's scaring them a little bit. But Nintendo could have a Disneyland. Nintendo could have a television network. Nintendo could have literally anything with those characters. And I'm wondering who's going to be the person who steps up and does it. And it starts with going to.
The last time we did game that they should. Nintendo is a world treasure. Their games should be played by every child and many adults all over the world. However, they are not allowing us to reap that treasure because they are keeping it from us by forcing us to buy a piece of hardware.
Right.
They need to get off their high horse, and they need to allow us to play these incredible games wherever we really are, not where we want them to be.
Ironically, the reason Nintendo is where they are is because Yamauchi-san, who is a great man who deserves tons more respect than he ever gets, transformed them from a playing card company into a toy company, into a game company. And he had vision and he had courage to do it within an even more conservative Japanese business climate.
The last time I said that, the response that I got through emails and Twitter was, Nintendo makes a huge amount of money on their hardware. They're doing incredibly well on their hardware. Reggie says that they're going to make an incredible amount of money on their hardware. And what happened last quarter? They're not making a lot of money on their hardware. They're not.
So to answer your question,
so it's time.
I think exclusives, first-party content, third-party exclusives would benefit from being offered on this much broader stage that we were talking about in the first episode.
Business, right?
Yeah, I think because these 2.5 billion people are going to be gamers, and that 250 million console market might grow if you can convince those people, hey, you want to play the most recent iteration of this game, the highest graphic resolution.
Put old, even old like Jack and Daxter.
And if you don't convince them, at least you're making money selling them the $5 game.
Right, controller, exactly.
The controller has been I mean, it's one thing to say it's
your
not on my
DualShock 4
TV.
might work with your iPad.
That's right. As soon as, and Apple has released the standard. This is not something we're speculating. They've released the standard that if you go on the internet, you can see images of controllers that are coming out for iOS devices. That has been the barring factor. There's a reason controllers look like controllers do. It's because that is the best way to control that kind of game.
Didn't a group in the UK, like 10 years ago, determined that people were better drivers of automobiles using a PlayStation controller than using a steering wheel?
Oh, how interesting.
And that's a really fascinating kind of
that's
fact.
interesting.
Yeah.
Well, it's Darwin. I mean, we've gotten the perfect controller. That's why they all look roughly the same. They are really, really good
at that.
At telegraphing from our brains to what we want to do on the screen. We need that on iOS devices. Touch is great. Some games will always use touch. That's all fantastic. Expands the market. But for the kind of games that we're talking about here, you need that controller.
Nintendo controller for iOS. We're calling it here. All right, we'll be back next week in the bonus round to talk more about how publishers are going to navigate all the new consoles.